You prepared for weeks. You researched the company. You practiced the answers. You wore the right clothes. You thought the interview went well. An algorithm disagreed. HireVue, the AI interview platform used by Unilever, Goldman Sachs, Delta Airlines, and over 1,000 other companies, says it can analyze up to 25,000 data points per candidate. Your facial expressions, your vocal patterns, the specific words you choose, the microseconds you pause before answering. None of that was on your resume. All of it was scored. And the question, no one at the company can answer for you. What did the system see in your face that you didn't know was there? By the end of this video, you'll know whether your last interview may have been scored by AI and exactly how to tell in the next one. This is how the invisible interview works. The story of AI interviews starts with a familiar problem. Too many candidates. Too few hours. By 2014, HireVue had added something new to the equation. Not just recording interviews for human review, but having an algorithm score them. The same video, the same words, evaluated by a model trained to identify patterns correlated with job success. The pitch was compelling. Remove human bias from the first round. No interviewer prejudice. No snap judgments based on appearance. Just objective data. The problem is what the algorithm learned to call objective. The pandemic accelerated everything. In-person interviews became impossible. AI platforms became essential infrastructure. Companies that had been cautious became dependent. By 2025, HireVue had processed over 70 million video interviews worldwide. 70 million people evaluated, at least in part, by a model they never saw, assessing qualities they didn't know were being measured. Most of them never knew, but someone did know. In 2018, a researcher at MIT decided to measure exactly what these systems see and what they miss. What she found didn't just challenge HireVue. It challenged every company using this class of technology. To understand why this matters, you have to know what the algorithm is actually measuring. HireVue's system focuses on three main things: your face, how it moves while you speak; your voice, how you sound; and your words, the specific language you use. The theory is simple and seductive, that these signals predict job performance, that the way your face moves when you answer a question says something deep about how you'll perform in a role. In 2018, a researcher at MIT asked a basic question: what do facial analysis systems actually see? Joy Buolamwini's work at the MIT Media Lab tested commercial facial analysis systems across gender and skin tone. Not HireVue specifically, but the same class of underlying technology. Error rates for classifying the gender of lighter-skinned men, under 1%. Error rates for darker-skinned women, up to 35%. The technology that was supposed to remove human bias had learned a different kind of bias. From data, from training sets that overrepresented some faces and underrepresented others. HireVue is not a facial recognition system in the strict legal sense, but it is a facial analysis system. And when the underlying technology performs differently across demographic groups, the scores it produces are not neutral. In November 2019, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, EPIC, filed a complaint with the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. EPIC argued that HireVue's system was collecting sensitive biometric data, facial geometry, vocal patterns without meaningful consent, and that the AI was helping make employment decisions through analysis that couldn't be audited, explained, or appealed. A little over a year later, in early 2021, HireVue announced it was discontinuing facial expression analysis. They removed the part everyone could see, the vocal analysis, the language scoring, the behavioral pattern detection. Those stayed. And the companies using HireVue kept using it for Unilever's global graduate recruitment, for Goldman Sachs entry-level positions, for Delta Airlines cabin crew selection. His name is Brendan Baker. In January 2021, he applied for a supply chain job at CVS. He wasn't hired, and it wasn't until later that he discovered his interview had been analyzed by an AI platform he didn't know was running. Court records in his case showed that CVS was still running HireVue video interviews through a third-party platform called Effectiva, which analyzed candidates' facial expressions, eye contact, voice intonation, and inflection to assign an employability score. The score included evaluating whether a candidate had, and this is a direct quote, an innate sense of integrity and honor. A Massachusetts court allowed the case to proceed. CVS settled privately in July 2024. They removed the part everyone could see. The analysis moved to a vendor they didn't have to disclose. 700, now over 1,000 companies. Millions of candidates. A system whose detailed decision logic no candidate can see. And most employers never question. And most candidates never knew the camera was scoring them. If you've done a video interview and only now realize AI might have scored it, say so in the comments. Drop the company name if you remember it. The number of people who didn't know is part of the story, and a pattern of names is evidence. Let me show you what 25,000 data points actually looks like in practice. According to its own technical materials, HireVue's AI, before facial analysis was removed, could score candidates across 54 facial action units, tracking tiny movements around your eyes, mouth, and forehead. Vocal features like pitch variation, speaking rate and energy, and lexical content. Not just which words you use, but which words appear over and over in the speech patterns of so-called high performers. The model was trained on people. The company already considered successful. It learned what successful looks like, sounds like, and talks like inside that company. Which means it learned what the current workforce looks like, and then optimized to replicate it. If a company's workforce is mostly white, mostly male, mostly neurotypical, the model can quietly learn that those are markers of fit, not because anyone explicitly programmed it to discriminate, but because the history baked into the data is itself the product of discrimination. Vocal energy scores can penalize candidates with strong accents because their speech patterns deviate from the training baseline. Word choice analysis can penalize candidates whose formal register comes from different cultures. Pause patterns can flag anxiety in candidates whose cultural norm is to think before speaking, as a sign of respect, not hesitation. In theory, the system is looking for competence. In practice, it may be measuring how closely you resemble the people who already work there. Now let's talk about scale and about who disappears. In 2021, Harvard Business School researchers studied 2,800 companies across 8 countries. Their conclusion? Around 27 million Americans are systematically excluded from consideration, not because they're unqualified, but because automated hiring systems filter them out before any human sees their application. 27 million people, roughly the population of Texas. Not invisible to the economy. They're working, caring for families, paying taxes, invisible to the automated front door of opportunity. The Harvard study called them hidden workers, qualified candidates systematically excluded because they have gaps in employment, non-linear career paths, or credentials that don't match the algorithm's template. A single mother who took 2 years off to care for a child. A veteran whose military job titles don't map cleanly to civilian roles. A 50-year-old professional re-entering the workforce. A graduate of a non-traditional institution. The system doesn't know their stories. It sees deviations from a pattern, and deviations get filtered out. Here's what makes this different from human bias. When a human interviewer makes a biased decision, there is at least a person, someone whose judgment can, in theory, be questioned. An AI system produces a score. The score produces a decision. The decision triggers a rejection email. The candidate never sees the score. They never see which signals mattered most. They never find out whether the accent they were born with or the pauses shaped by their culture contributed to a number that quietly ended their candidacy. In 2023, New York City became the first place in the United States to require companies using automated employment decision tools to run annual bias audits and to notify candidates when AI is used to evaluate them. In Illinois, the AI Video Interview Act has required companies to notify candidates about AI use in video interviews since January 2020 and to provide analysis results if requested. One city, one state. The technology is everywhere else. Follow the money. HireVue, like many AI vendors, sells access to a proprietary model. The algorithm itself is the product. If companies could fully open and audit how every decision is made, they'd have less reason to pay a premium for the black box. That creates a structural problem. The companies using HireVue are not in a position to fully evaluate whether the tool discriminates. They don't have access to the model. They see the output, a ranked list of candidates, but not the reasoning beneath it. The candidate doesn't know. The employer doesn't really know. And the regulator can't easily audit what it can't see. HireVue continues to process millions of interviews a year. Inside that opacity. None of this means every rejection is discrimination, but it does mean discrimination can now hide inside code and scale. This is one of the shadow structures that can decide your professional future. Before you finish speaking, if you want to see what happens when a system doesn't evaluate your interview, it evaluates your address. Subscribe. The next investigation. Your zip code as a sentence. Before I give you the full picture, I need to say something directly to you. If you've ever done a video interview and felt like something was off, that the questions were strange, the format felt cold, the feedback made no sense. You may have been scored by a system you didn't know existed. Now let me show you the scale. You've just seen 3 layers of the invisible interview, a system that measures tens of thousands of signals you didn't know were being captured, a technology that performs differently across demographic groups and had to remove its most visible feature after a federal complaint, and a market of over 1,000 companies running a tool that no candidate can audit and no employer fully understands. And all of it legal. All of it still operating, all of it growing. EP04 showed you the résumé filter that inferred your age, race, and disability from the document you submitted. This system goes further. It analyzes the parts of you that aren't on any document, the biological signals you produce when you're trying your best. And it calls that objective. HireVue is still operating. Goldman Sachs, Unilever, Delta, and over 1,000 other companies are still using it. The FTC complaint from 2019 led to no enforcement action. Facial analysis was removed voluntarily, not because the law required it. The question the Mobley case asked about ATS is still unanswered for AI interviews. If the system makes the decision, who is responsible for the decision? And when no one is responsible, your rejection becomes a glitch, not an injustice that anyone has to fix. That interview you thought went well? The algorithm had already decided, before the human in the room said a word. So, HireVue processed 70 million interviews with a system it couldn't fully explain, and eventually had to partially dismantle under regulatory pressure. What does that mean for your next video interview? It means the camera is not neutral, but understanding what it measures gives you more control than you think. None of what follows guarantees a job, but it changes one thing. It stops you from losing before a human even sees you. Here are the cheat codes. 1. Ask before you record. You have the right to ask whether AI is being used to evaluate your video interview. In New York City, companies are legally required to tell you. In Illinois, they're required to share the analysis if you ask. Outside those jurisdictions, most won't volunteer it, but asking creates a record and sometimes changes how your interview is handled. 2. Control your environment. Lighting, background, and audio quality affect AI scoring systems. A well-lit face with a neutral background produces a cleaner signal. Reduce ambient noise. Use a headset if possible. These aren't vanity choices, they're calibration. 3. Speak deliberately. AI vocal analysis scores energy, pace, and clarity. Deliberate, measured speech, not rushed, tends to score better across systems. If your first language isn't English, a moderate, consistent pace helps compensate for accent variation in the baseline. 4. Request information about the decision. Under GDPR in Europe, candidates have rights around automated decisions, including the right to human review. In the US, there's no equivalent federal right, but asking which tools were used and how your interview was evaluated puts companies on notice. Some will share more than you expect to avoid legal exposure. 5. Document the process. If you do an AI-scored interview and are rejected, note the company, the date, the platform, and what you were told about how AI was used. If you're repeatedly rejected by companies using the same platform, that pattern matters, and patterns become evidence. 6. Know which companies use it. HireVue publishes a partial client list. Unilever, Goldman Sachs, Delta, Vodafone, Urban Outfitters, Intel. Before you apply, knowing the platform lets you prepare and decide whether you want to participate in that system at all. The invisible interview isn't going away, but it isn't a black mirror. It's a machine with measurable biases and documented failures. The candidates who understand it are the ones who can navigate it consciously and the ones best positioned to push for the transparency that changes it. We just saw a system that evaluates you before you finish speaking. That scores the biological signals you produce when you're trying your hardest. That performs differently across demographic groups and removed its most visible feature only after a federal complaint. A shadow structure wrapped in HR software. The resume screen filtered what you wrote. The ATS inferred what you didn't say. The video interview analyzed what you couldn't control. In each case, you didn't know. Now, what happens when the system isn't evaluating your interview? It's evaluating your address. You didn't choose where you grew up. You may not have chosen where you live now. But a risk algorithm, running inside major banks across the United States, has already formed a conclusion about you based on your zip code. It doesn't call it discrimination. It calls it risk assessment. You applied for a loan. The algorithm checked your address. Your neighborhood had the wrong demographic profile. The system flagged it. No human reviewed it. No explanation was given. You were declined. In the next shadow structures, the system that turned your zip code into a sentence. If you've ever done a video interview and had no idea an algorithm was scoring your face, share this. The system is most powerful when it's invisible. 70 million interviews. Most people still don't know. The system counts on you believing the rejection was personal. It wasn't personal. It was a shadow structure, and it's still running.